All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of your morning cup of Q and J. I think this is going to be our fifth episode, which is very, very exciting. Originally, we were talking about, you know what? Let's just try it out. Let's just have four conversations to see how this goes. And it turns out that we are still really enjoying talk to each other, Q. So
You
which is
know?
awesome.
hmm
So in this episode, we want to continue again our conversation around and continue the celebration around Mental Health Awareness Month and Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I know last week we talked about gender roles and a little bit about dating. This week, we are going to explore the topic around representation, specifically with Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians, and Dasi, like just our people. However, before we start, let's play this little game because I know that the topic of representation, because Q, I think you might need to do all the talking on representation. But I know the representation, this topic, it can be pretty intense and maybe heavy. So let's start with something a little bit lighter and fun. It's something that what I called, growing up as Asian. What are some of the little things in our household that are totally normal to us when we were growing up, but when you look back right now, and it can be like a little bit weird for like non-Asians, and this is purely based on our experience, and one of the most obvious one is dishwasher. A lot of Asian families and households, they don't use dishwashers. Instead, they use dishwasher as dish racks to dry the dishes, right?
hmm That was
So what
actually
else?
the
Well, we can
first
just
thing.
kind of like play around and just kind of list some of those things. And maybe in the future episode, we can explain it why it's funny, why it's weird.
A dishwasher was the first thing I thought about. I think the idea was they want to save money and that and I don't know, but I never had that rationale. It's just like, oh, this is where you dry a dish rack. I mean,
Yeah.
I just thought it was the weirdest thing when I went to like another friend's house. Usually they're white because they had dishwashers, and you'll be like, "Oh, I was washing dishes." I'm like, "Okay, I'll help out," and then they would push it and put it in the dishwasher
Yes.
and run it, and it was just so strange to me. I mean, even my current place, like we have a dishwasher. I've never used it just because I wash, and then I air dry everything.
Yeah.
I just like it doesn't feel right. Just and
Yes.
I think the other off the top of my head, like my favorite, growing up Vietnamese American, it was like the different superstitions. It's always my
Yes.
favorite because there's certain things that just I think is hilarious. So my personal favorite one is if you sit on someone's pillow, they will become stupid. And it was just one of the it's for me it's my favorite because it's just led to some of the dumbest fights possible. It's like if when you're fighting with your siblings and you can sit on their pillow being
Yes.
stupid. Um but
And
like
oh,
yeah.
go for it.
No, go on.
And there's just a couple others that kind of like, and how to say, a lot of Asian families don't use microwave. They don't believe, they think it's not safe.
Oh my god.
Um, of course, the common ones are like take off our shoes when we enter the house. It's
hmm
very common.
hmm
Um, and and oftentimes you'll see some sort of Asian Chinese looking calendar on the wall.
hmm
Along with that, it's an Asian household. There's that calendar, there's the rice cooker, there's always a rice cooker in the kitchen. The house is religious, you'll see a little altar
hmm
on the ground, on the floor, or maybe in the living room.
hmm
What else? Some of those. Oh, and they love, I think that the older generation, they love hang dry clothes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they love hand dry clothes, even though Some of them might even have dryers and washers, but they just love hand dried clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, another sign is you have to be an Asian household when you see boxes of instant noodles, ramen noodles.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah.
I will
No,
say the shoe, I, even though by Western standard it's weird, I I think it's, for me personally, I'm like, I really like taking off my shoes just because I know, like, where I've gone, I walk in LA, I don't even want to know what's been on the streets. So for
mhm.
me, it's like but I can, like, some people are like, oh, you take off your shoes? I'm like, yeah, you don't. Especially right now with COVID, it's like
Exactly. Yes.
putting it out there. Everyone else needs to catch up.
Yes. And on top of at Asian household, on top of taking off shoes, they have these little slippers. You know, I'm talking about like very thin the bottom, cover kind of like cloth
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
slippers that you put in and walk around in the house. And I thought, especially in Taiwan, like almost every household has it. But in a number of Asian American family households, I have seen those. It kind of makes sense too because it helps to keep your feet warm. And yeah, and another thing I learned is that when you walk around with those like cloth slippers, you don't make noise.
Oh yeah. It's
Yeah, it's
nice.
quieter. So anyway,
And
so like, do you have a couple other more that you want to share before we dive into the topic of representation?
I think you covered all the every single one that what came off the top of my head, especially the dishwasher. The dishwasher one, I'm
Yeah.
like, that one just sounds like, they're more efficient. But even for just me habitually, I'm like, I know logically that dishwashers are more efficient and can clean really well, but I just can't do it. Can't do it.
Yeah. And yeah, if listening out there, like friends out there, like if you have any of those interesting household funny information, please share with us. We would love to know. And I know each culture, I'm talking about Hispanic culture, maybe the Black culture, Jewish culture. I think that we all have some of these little interesting, unusual behaviors or activities that we all have. And I think that this is what make us so unique and fun.
Mhm.
And yeah, as a adult, it's like looking back, it's just always, I love to talk, having conversations with my Black friends, with Hispanic friends, just kind of share about these little funny, silly things. Anyway, so all right then, let's move to the topic of the day, which is representation. So before we dive in, I just want to share some of the facts about overall Asian Americans. And when I say Asian Americans, I think we refer to first generation, second generation, 1.5 generation, South Asians, Southeast Asians, North Asian, like all of us. So here's some interesting data. So 6% of the US population is Asian Americans. That's about 18.5 million people. So believe it or not, Asian American immigrants consists of 27% of entire Asian American population. So let's just say, so that's saying that about 1 in 3 of Asian Americans is either immigrants or know someone that is immigrant. It's just pretty true. And between 2010 and 2017, the United States, our nation's overall population grew by 5%. But during this 7 years, Asian American population grew by 23%. That's a lot. That's 4 times as fast as overall population. So that's the same that we are the probably the fastest growing ethnic groups in this country right now.
Mhm.
And of course, the states that have the most Asian Americans are the usual suspects. Hawaii, California, New York, and Texas. And I live in Colorado. And Colorado, I think, is ranked 32 or 34 in terms of having the most Asian Americans. Another thing about
Mhm.
Asian American is that we are so diverse. And we mentioned about this in previous episode. Officially in this country, in the United States, there are 24 types of Asian Americans. And types, when I say type, meaning based on their national origins.
Mm-hmm.
And language-wise, there are 18 different languages spoken by Asian Americans in this country, officially. So officially, there are 24 types of us in 18 different languages.
Mm-hmm.
And another interesting fact is if you have gone on a road trip across the country, you have probably noticed that almost every single small town have a Chinese or Asian restaurants. So as of 2015, it is estimated that there were about 47,000 Chinese restaurants alone. 47 Chinese restaurants alone, not including like Thai, Korean, others. So Starbucks in 2015 had about 15,000 restaurants. McDonald's 2015 had about 15,000 restaurants too. So Chinese restaurants, they're everywhere. And according with NBC News, Asian Americans' buying power means that the ability to invest assets or owning restaurants, businesses, or spending power, able to shop in this country, topped $1 trillion in 2018. Despite that, we are only consist of 6% of population, but our buying power, our contribution to the economy is about $1 trillion in 2018, which is higher than a lot of other demographic groups. In Colorado itself, the Asian American in Colorado itself contribute about $7 billion. So, and politically right now in United States, that there are 13 United States representatives and 3 United States senators that are Asian Americans, well, identified as Asian Americans. That's about 3% of all the politicians in the Congress, which is very low. And this is the thing called bamboo ceiling, meaning that 27% of Asian Americans represent lower level positions in corporations, but fewer than 19% of Asians are managers, and less than 14% of Asian Americans are executives. And this is by the Harvard Business Reviews. And another report by NPR and Harvard's Business Review in 2017 shows that 27% of Asian Americans have personally been discriminated against in applying for jobs. 27%, and about 25% of them being underpaid or not being promoted equally. Again, that's 1 in 4. And 1 in 4 Asian American, 25%, being discriminated in trying to rent or buy houses. And here's another really important data. 35%, 1 in 3 Asian Americans have experienced insensitive or offensive comments, racial comments, and have experienced, racial slurs. That's 1 in 3. And the last data that I want to share with y'all is that talking about films, that movie Crazy Rich Asians is the only second all Asian film cast, I think, in the whole history of the Hollywood, all Asian film casts. And in October 2018, Crazy Rich Asians became the highest growing romantic comedy of the last 10 years and the 6th highest growing romantic comedy ever. So here are just some basic facts and data about Asian Americans. So Q, take it away. So
where to start? So the numbers about first thing I want to also mention is those numbers from 2017. where, 35% experience insensitive or offensive comments and 32 experience racial slurs. Oh, that's definitely gone up since COVID.
Oh yeah. Oh
Oh
yeah.
my God, I think that number has absolutely gone up, and there's been a nonprofit working to help report these numbers. I believe, yeah, the FBI actually confirmed there's been a surge in anti-Asian hate
Mm-hmm.
crime since the pandemic because of how certain public figures have politicized it, and which helps nobody. But here we are, and it's. I think the big question is, like, does representation matter? And for me, representation is like Schrodinger's cat, and like yes and no to a certain degree. When I think about representation, the first thing is, like, representation is really important. It's not the be all end all. And I think where a lot of our failings within the Asian American Pacific Islander community is this sense of, if I see myself on the big screen, if I see myself in Crazy Rich Asians, we've made it. And is so incorrect. That one, yes, I think we should absolutely celebrate that kind of progress within Hollywood. An institution like Hollywood. There's these other institutions too, but Hollywood is a really major one, which has, I'm fairly certain, the numbers within Hollywood are even worse. Even worse than what you just described.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it was worthwhile to celebrate it. Now, when you look at the actual content of Crazy Rich Asians, I mean, some people go, it's just a romantic comedy. Sure, it is romantic comedy. The larger question too is, like, storytelling is really about how we see ourselves and how we want to see ourselves. And personally, with Crazy Rich Asians, as much as I enjoyed what it presented, at its core fundamental value system of, this is what you should aspire to be, really crazy rich. I'm like, I have no aspiration towards that. I don't, I actually remember I was talking to my mom about that film, and she said, it was fun. And then she got quiet. She's like, she said specifically that she felt that it was almost, given how much inequality and how much health and wealth disparity there is globally, she felt that it felt uncomfortable for her to see that kind of rich lifestyle glamorized. And again, she's like, I understand it's a romantic comedy, but I just, I feel like if anything, it's almost immoral to glamorize that, knowing full well that, and almost like being willfully ignorant of how inequitable. And also, speaking about Crazy Rich Asians, like, it takes place in Singapore, and there was a really great discussion amongst Singaporeans, because, like, people assume, oh, Singapore's all like ethnically Chinese. I'm like, there's other immigrants in Singapore,
Mm-hmm.
And there was a great, I can't remember where it's at, but I can probably find it. But there was a Singaporean activist who said, they had issues with Crazy Rich Asian because it felt very Asian American. Like, there's nothing wrong with being Asian American. They get the politics. They're like, but it's like, one, the story takes place like in this exotic place, Singapore. Like, we're not exotic,
Yeah.
This is our home. And then they're like, on top of that, like, all the main characters are all ethnically Chinese, and there's actually one actress who's like half Japanese, half white,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But she's like, but there's a scene where, the main character and her bestie drive up to this mansion, and it's a party, and the guards or the gatekeepers are very obviously like not ethnically Chinese. They're very brown.
Oh
And
yeah.
remember that scene? And they just talked about that, and they just said, like, for Asian Americans to go on about representation, here you are just perpetuating these power dynamics in Singapore, of representation, power dynamics in Singapore. And I went, oh, dang,
Yep.
they're so right. So that's when I completely understand the impetus of representation. I also think when I say it's yes and no, I say yes, it is important. But if the representation also perpetuates ongoing power dynamics that are unfair and inequitable to different groups, or if it perpetuates, stereotypes You know,
Hmm.
I always go, I like to like temper my enthusiasm for it. And it is, again, it is not to feel like, oh, representation is not important. It is. It's just more of like, is it surface level, or are you actually, really doing something radically different, and the other, I think at the end of the day, like, because with, film and television are such major media, and I see people like, oh, look, it's an Asian character. Yes, that's very exciting. Contextually, what are they doing, on screen? Do they have any lines? Are they
Hmm.
active or passive character? Are they supporting or main? These are really important questions, and that's why I'm like, we can't stop at the idea of like, oh, they're on screen. The end. We did it. We made it to Hollywood. I mean,
Oh
there was,
yeah.
yeah, and then it, because uh, there was that really fun um, moment in 2017 as well, where Scarlett Johansson took on the role
Oh
of,
yeah, that was bad. Yeah.
oh my God. I love Ghost in the Shell, and actually I can speak personally. So growing up, this is why I say representation is very important. So for me, growing up, Asian American, Vietnamese American, there was just not a lot of media that really depicted incredibly complex, intelligent, and extremely strong protagonists who happen to be Asian, and or Asian American women. So I was really, and especially Asian, that are non-sexualized, non-exoticized, and also not just personality and mentally, psychologically, but like physically strong. You really don't see Asian woman actors who are very obvious in showing muscle.
Hmm.
We can have a whole discussion about, there's a cultural value, beauty standards, so that we can get into that. For me, as a Vietnamese American, teenager growing up, and I actually had huge body dysmorphia, because for me, naturally, I put on muscle very easily, and I
Hmm.
just never saw that on screen. So I always thought there's something wrong with me. Is there
Hmm.
what's I'm a total freak. Um, teenager dysmorphia, and I'm very sure if I had had that positive representation in popular media, oh my God, that would have helped so much. I didn't though. So one of the only TV shows and series that really had that is Ghost in the Shell. Now, if you look at the original manga,
Ah.
if you look at the original manga, it's like, it's questionable, but I grew up watching on Adult Swim, like
Okay.
Ghost in the Shell, Standalone Complex, and I love that show. I love Motoko. She's animated, and who cares? But that was all I had, honestly.
Hmm.
So this Japanese show, animated show that has this female protagonist who has identity crises, who's complex, deals with who is, everyone respects her. So I love that show. I will rewatch it, and even if they have multiple adaptations, even the adaptations to that, I'll still give it a go, because for me, I'm like, I love that character. The only other character that was like muscular Asian female is Chun-Li in fighting games. That's
Oh
all I got.
yeah, yeah,
That's literally all
Chun-Li.
I got.
Street Fighters, yes.
Yeah, that's all I got. So if I also play fighting games, and if Chun-Li isn't there, I'm like, guarantee I will be playing her.
Yes.
So, so as funny as it is to be like, oh, Quinn, like you're two, like the two like popular Asian female characters who are muscular are as an anime character and a video game character. I'm like, yeah, that's all I got, man.
Yeah,
Hopefully that's
yeah.
teaching you. But like, so when fast forward to 2017, and Scarlett Johansson is apparently Japanese. For me, I was angry and upset on so many levels. One, because I understand institutionally Hollywood is racist. you know,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, we mean well. I'm like, racism is not about your intent. Racism is literally about your policy and even your
Mm-hmm.
criteria of who's a good actor and who's a bad actor. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
got into a huge side note. I got into a huge Facebook fight with an old classmate who he blocked me because he's an ass. But he's also Chinese American, and he was going on about like Scarlett Johansson is the best actress, blah blah blah, and it was just this insane internalized racism about like, how do you not see how insanely
Yeah.
racist you're asserting is? So that was that, institutional like offense. And personally, I was like, here I am, one of the only characters that I feel really represented is
Yeah.
now being taken over by this very obviously white woman.
Yes.
You know,
It just kind of imagine, from the white listener out there will, if you're watching, the analogy I like to use, for a lot of my white friends that they think that what's a big deal. But just imagine if finally we make a documentary or movie about George Washington, the founding father of the United States, and we cast George Washington instead of a white man playing George Washington, we cast George Washington as Asian dude playing George Washington. What would your reaction be? And they said, no, hell no. Exactly.
hmm and it's just like it's one of those things. Like for me personally, it was that Ghost in the Shell. I like to use an example of like representation matters in that sense because it's like what the frick, or no, honestly, no, I'm just gonna say what the fuck, it was like,
Yes.
for me, it was like, I love this character, and it's, and even, and it was really interesting. So some other person who I no longer, hello, my cat is joining.
Hmm.
Hello, kitty.
Oh,
She
I
wants,
can see the cat.
I know, she's gonna go in and out of frame. She wants attention, but oh no, she doesn't want attention anymore. So, um, I think what was really interesting, someone who I'm also not friends with anymore, he sent me an article from the original manga artist, the manga graphic novel
Mhm.
or graphic artist for Ghost in the Shell, who said, "Oh, I'm okay with Scarlett Johansson." And I remember he said, "Oh, because the Japanese are okay with Scarlett Johansson, you should be okay." And I went, "Oh." Here's the thing. So here's the other thing that was also like that made me so angry on that level. So when there was obvious backlash about Motoko being played by a white woman, and they also get to call her Major, even though at the very end it's like, oh, she's a white woman or her white shell, even though her original body's Japanese. I'm like, kill me.
Mm.
It's like, um, a lot of white people, and also Asian Americans and Asians too, went, well, if Japan's okay with it, why are you so offended? I'm like, because Japan does not represent Asian America. And also, at large, Asian countries do not represent the Asian American experience.
Yes.
And I think what was, that really boils down to this this idea of Asian Americans being the perpetual foreigners, of that we can't even advocate for ourselves. A non like an Asian country, which we may not even be from. I'm Vietnamese. How the hell is Japan advocating for me? It's like,
Exactly.
yeah. So I think that was one of those things where it's like we still have so much work to do. And when with Crazy Rich Asians, this is not to invalidate what it did accomplish. It accomplished quite a bit. I also have to be a critical consumer and go, look, you're also still perpetuating the idea of foreignness, of exotic Singapore, And
Yes.
sure, you could say, oh, why don't you just, the original author is Singaporean, it takes place in, sure, okay. But like, even how things are framed, it's like, look at his opulence, look how amazing it is. Could it ever be done in America? And I'm like, yeah, actually, have you seen the Kardashians? They have an entire TV show about that shit. So I think there's just a lot, again, I'm not trying to dispel like the importance of seeing yourself on screen. It is very important. I also think it's critical to be like, how am I being depicted on screen? And if in a case of, am I being depicted as passive? Am I being always a perpetual side character? Yeah, or
Yeah.
if the character that I love is now being taken over by a white woman, you know,
I know it's Be
I'm
very
so salty.
frustrating.
I'm so salty about that. I'm not ever forgive anybody in that producing team.
Yes. So another thing I want to talk about also, and then talking about representation and just using numbers. So historically, when I say historically, meaning that last 50 to 100 years, when we
Mhm.
talk about Asian Americans, and it's often referred to the Chinese, the Japanese. And it kind of makes sense because the Chinese came like almost 150 years ago. They came like to build the railroads, and the Japanese came later, very soon later, and they start farming.
Mhm.
So, and when you look at the census data, even right now, that the biggest Asian American or Asian Americans population in this country are the Indians from India, the Chinese, the Japanese, and maybe the Koreans and the Viets. And so there's that. Um, again, earlier I was saying that we are so diverse, but if you break down that 18 million Asian Americans, there's that different representation, meaning that different levels of representation in terms of just pure physical bodies in this country. And another thing about the economic status too, because these Chinese and Japanese people been here for generations. Therefore, we have Chinatown. Therefore, we have what we call fifth, sixth generation Japanese people or living here. I don't even consider them Japanese anymore because they're so Americanized. They used to own farms, and some of them probably still own the farms. And so I kind of want to dive into that a little bit, that how, since we're so diverse, the history, the generation is very diverse too. How can we continue to advocate the representations of other demographic of Asian that their population are smaller?
Mhm.
How can we include them into this, little bit bigger conversation? If we ever going to have this Asian American identity, if we ever going to have, then I think we need to be all inclusive.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think this is a great question because this actually goes down to another Harvard case. So if you remember, there was a case against Harvard, and it was spearheaded by a white lawyer.
Oh, for the affirmative action thing,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I remember, and I like to start off with that one because it had a lot of support, a lot from a bunch of Chinese Americans. And, like, yeah, we're being discriminated against. And then there was also a subset of, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans at large going, what are you doing, dude?
Yes.
And, you know, I think to really, that boils down to a larger question of there is a huge myth. And that's why, Crazy Rich Asians is such a great popular media to riff on about this representation. There's a very popular myth that Asians are wealthy. All Asians. I've
No.
heard, so just looked at me one day and said, "You're Asian, you're rich," and I went, "The hell?" It's like,
Yes.
I grew, and I grew up with a single mom, and it's like, "You're rich." I was like, "Are you kidding me?" It's like, and of course they're white. They just said, "You're rich," and I said, "No, I'm not," and he said, "You're Asian, you're rich. Doesn't matter." And then he said, "All Asians are rich." And I just sat there going, "Wow, someone just did a racist," It's like,
Yes.
um,
I
and
wish I wish I was rich. So I'm
oh
saying,
yeah, I'd be like, yeah, I wish I hadn't think about money. That'd be nice.
I know. Just imagine, Q, if you and I, if we were rich, we can do so many other like fun documentary films.
I wouldn't have to worry about. I could be my own producer, but regardless.
Yes.
But yeah. So, but there is that myth, and where is that? Sociological, socioeconomic myth come from? And it really does come from the minority model or the model
Mm,
minority myth. The idea of like, look at the Asians, they pulled themselves up by their bootstrings, even
mm,
though that's not true. And the perniciousness of that myth really boils down to if a couple things that upholds white supremacists, hierarchies. It pits different non-white groups against one another, and especially in terms of how it affects Asian Americans. If you really drink that Kool-Aid and you go, oh wait, I'm not rich, I'm a failure as an American, and as an Asian, it is so pernicious. And it's just not, I don't know how to say it, it's terrible for your mental health.
Oh yeah, it is. And I think you mentioned really important that the socioeconomic status within Asian American population, and yes, like our culture emphasize on, education, emphasize on starting your own business. A lot of Asian families don't believe in renting houses. They want to buy a house. So that doesn't mean that like any other demographic population, there's a lot of us are live in poverty. There's not, even when you look at supposedly East Asian Americans supposed to be the most well off, but even within us, no, that is not true. There are pockets of us are really well too, but they study their ass off, they work their ass off, something that a lot of American people just not willing to do. When you look at Asian cultures, work ethic, working 60, 70 hours a week. I'm talking Asian American, even in Asia, that's kind of expected. You have weekends. What the fuck is weekends? You got like pay time off. What the fuck is that? No, you work. If lucky, you might get one day off. Or half day off. So anyway, so it's just not that we were born rich. We have a whole bunch of gold in our backyard, or whatever. No, like it also. Back to that model minority myth that white supremacy, just think that we are all born rich, but no, we work hard. A lot of us that are successful, maybe they did inherited some money, whatever success, but rest, no, they just like average people, but they work their ass off.
Oh yeah.
And we have to emphasize that like they sacrifice, they work, and therefore, they're successful. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. And I also I think the really important thing as to, the work ethic too, is that, we do, here's the thing, we do work very hard. A lot of people work very hard. The question is does that hard work lead to returns? They're all, right now with COVID, there's a lot of essential workers who are not white. They're definitely Black, brown, non-white communities. And I would be very hard pressed to argue that they're not working hard. But where they're in terms of where they are, the structures in place and the barriers in place that prevent them from, progressing upwards.
Exactly.
The model minority myth, really open, if you look at poverty rates among the Asian American population, before the minority myth, we were in line with the Black and brown community. And the moment that model minority myth really came to fruition, you could see the level of poverty decrease. And it's a really fascinating, important part of history. And so I absolutely agree that if anything, Asian Americans working our butts off should be like, look, you get the same opportunities to other communities. Look how they will absolutely thrive like we are. Yeah. But that's not how, racial hierarchies work. Not in the U.S. And, you mentioned the bamboo ceiling. I'm like, yeah, that's the thing about the racial hierarchies. We can work our butts off, but we won't, set in place by the people in power. We won't get past that. Yeah. And I think I forgot to mention to your larger questions, I wanted to tie into what I said about Harvard. So how do we better represent the diversity of Asian America? Honestly, census, and really advocating for a census that breaks down, East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, Central Asian too. And I remember a while ago, there was a push for that, I think in California.
Yeah, I think it's called disaggregated data.
Yeah, segregated data.
Yes.
And I remember specifically, it was Chinese Americans who, a lot of money, said no. And I remember, I mean, specifically, I mean, their impetus is like, you know, effectively like the poor Asians, you know, would lower the numbers of poverty, so then they would have a better chance. And you know, I don't agree with it. I think it's complete horseshit. I get the logic behind it. Like if you segregate data and it shows that Chinese Americans are largely more affluent than their Vietnamese counterparts or Hmong counterparts or Cambodian, you know, Southeast Asians in general, we are not going to get the financial aid for college. And I'm like, yeah. But, you know, I remember, and I was really upset about that. And that was one of those big moments in Asian America where I went, look, I understand the Pan-Asian American movement. I understand, you know, the history, like the Chinese, you know, immigrated and the Japanese immigrated, you know, I get the legacy. But man, is this total bullshit. How the hell do you represent the Vietnamese, you know,
Yes.
like, and, you know, every other Southeast Asian? You know,
Mhm.
I remember it was, that was such a moment because it's like, yeah, even within the Asian American community, you know, Southeast Asians are the ethnic minority. We are largely poor. We don't got that money that,
Yeah.
you know, other like groups have. We just don't. And we
Yeah.
can go on about like the trauma, diaspora, war, you know, everything. But you know, numbers wise, we don't have that money. So when I
Yeah.
saw that, I'm like, oh fuck. You know, it's like,
Yes.
you know, yeah, I'm like, you know who needs that financial aid? We do. You know who doesn't need that financial
Exactly.
aid? You. It's like, but I just
Yeah.
remember though. I mean, if anything, like, and as much as I get it, I was like, you know, if we really do want to have better representation of Asian Americans and the diversity of what we have, is to really, instead of being like we're all pan Asian, we're all one. I'm like, no, man, that's not how it works. You know, I know tons of Vietnamese who are super racist against other Asian groups. You know, and
Mhm.
vice versa. And like that's not okay. But I'm like, to say that we're all together, I'm like, well, yes and no. We are all Asian American, but at the same time, we're all very different. And I think to really do that, like something as basic as desegregated data, census data, to really not group Asian Americans, like, are you Asian American? You're one group. And it's like, I remember even talking to a couple of like South Asian friends and like, so do I put myself as Asian or like, or here, you know, I was like, where do I
Oh
go? Because I
yeah.
don't,
Oh yeah.
you know. So it's just like a whole discussion that I think gets largely dismissed because we're so
Mhm.
dismissed because I mean, a lot of Asian Americans are very preoccupied about representation. And I will say on a more cynical level, you know, I'm like, okay, your representation is important, but you know, look at COVID. Like, look how quickly anti-Asian hate crimes rose with COVID-19, with the moment
Mhm.
people in power start racializing, politicizing the virus as, you know, Asian or the fault of Asians. Like, look, like, do you think people give a crap if you're on the big screen? You're still Asian to them. We have a lot
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And talking about COVID, you mentioned about the healthcare workers, and we know that there's a lot of Filipinas that work. They are, in a way, the stereotype is that they are famous for being nurses, and not famous, that they represent a decent amount of population that work in the healthcare system. And a couple of weeks ago, I was reading this report that these Filipinos nurses, they're not getting any supports, you know, and which is really sad. At the same time, they are the frontline worker, helping battling this virus. And another thing that, like, I remember a couple years ago, I started doing more research on this why there's the stereotype that there's so many Filipino nurses out there. And it's fascinating. We don't have time to get into it, but I will highly recommend you all to do some research to read the history between the Philippines and United States, and how it's back to supply and demand, back to the visa agreement, the immigration agreement between the two countries and stuff like that. That's why we have. That's why there's a lot of Filipinos that are nurses. It's this fascinating history. Like something, it did not, that stereotype did not just happen overnight. You're talking about accumulation of 50 and 80 years of history. So that's one thing that I want to highlight. Another thing I want to highlight is that, back to Quinn, you were talking about, that whole affirmative action thing, with Harvard. I will highly recommend this episode by, what's his name? Hassan Minaj, called the Patriot Act, that episode. So again, I'm not that familiar. I read a little bit about this whole affirmative action versus Harvard, but I thought after watching that episode by Hassan Minaj, I thought that was fascinating. I think he definitely helped me to have a little bit better and clear understanding what's behind it, what's behind this whole thing. And I think it boils down to have to do with, again, the privileged Asians, what I call they are probably, I know people gonna hate me to say that they are probably the Asian version of Karens, and
Asian Karens
versus us, like you and I, they couldn't get into Harvard because they were pissed, they didn't want to go to Stanford or Cornell or Yale or other Ivy League, and they just, I don't know, watch his show. Another thing I want to share is that this report by AAJC, it stands for Asian American Justice Center. I have worked with them before. Awesome organization. They're one of the few Asian American advocacy organization that are staffed by lawyers fighting for Asian American, like helping serving Asian American communities, which is awesome. They came out with this report 2 years ago, with 2017, 2018, that desegregated Asian American demographic data. So earlier during the introduction, like the data, a lot of demographic data I share with you all came from that report. They break down, Asian American by ethnicity, by language, by immigration wave, and stuff like that. And I loved it because it is, again, it's data driven, but it gives more a clear picture of who we are. It's not just we are Pan Asian American. No, it gives a more clear picture of who we are, how different, and how similar we are, the struggles that we face, the advantages that we have, the disadvantages that we have. So I highly recommend, and you can just Google it, just go to AAJC website, type in Asian American, you can download the report, and it's easy to read, a lot of graphics, a lot of data, and it's just fun to read. And the last thing that I want to share is that, representation, because I also teach a lot of diversity and inclusion. I give a lot of diversity and inclusion training at companies, local companies here in Denver, Colorado. And one thing I want to emphasize is that we have to have diversity before we can have inclusion. Because nowadays people even start talking about equity. And I'm like, fuck equity. We don't even have diversity. How can we get to equity? Like, for me, equity is an ideal. It's so important. It's a vision that we are so far away. We don't even have the representation. And when I talk about representation, it's back to that, not tokenism. Not just hire an Asian dude or a black guy, or a black woman, or a Hispanic woman to the company. No. Yes, we need that representation. We need that diversity. But that inclusion part is so essential that we need to invite these people onto the table, be part of the discussion, be part of the decision making. So even looking back to back to my question earlier, that Asian Americans, yes, even though right now it's predominantly occupied by Chinese Americans, the Indian American, maybe Filipino Americans, but the question for us also to think about, if we truly want to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month is that how can we not only have representation from other groups, the monks, the Khmers, the Bits, what else? There's others, not only we need them, but how can we invite them to the tables, have dialogue, have conversation, engage them, have everyone be part of this decision-making process, so yeah.
And I also want to add, I think I really appreciate that you said, like, we're definitely not equitable. Things are deeply inequitable. When I was on a great webinar last week, and it was a professor of public health at Berkeley, and she said, when you emphasize, like, there's a difference between being equal and equitable. We're not even at either,
Yeah.
And, it's one of those things, like, the goal is equity. People thought equality was the goal. I'm like, no. In fact, if you push for equality, without looking at, how things are inequitable, you actually perpetuate inequity. It was such a fantastic moment of what it gets one of those mic drops, like, oh, dang,
Yep.
like, and it was, but I also agree, because that also plays into, like, diversity and inclusion. I think people, when they say, oh, diverse, it's like, oh, I got the token, like, minority, I'm done. And it's like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
Diversity is not just the token, but unfortunately it's also been co-opted by major corporations to justify their hiring practices. Like, I got one, like, Asian, woo!
Yes.
Now I can get my tax break, instead of, like, doing nothing. That's just, like, surface level representation, diversity. That's nothing. It does nothing. It doesn't. You're still being like, oh, well, you're having a position of power, so good luck.
Yeah.
I want to end on it. Oh, go on. Sorry.
And combining that with workplace, like I've been reading reports that Asian Americans being passed for promotion or management that fueled by model minority myth, because they think that this Asian American worker is so good, such a good worker. Instead of promoting him or her to management position, I don't want to lose a good worker. That's one. That's 1%. And second is, that stereotype, that racist stereotypes that Asian Americans, we are passive, we are quiet, we are quote unquote not leadership material. We don't speak up, we're not aggressive, blah, 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 which I think is 80, 90%, 100% bullshit. If you never give that person an opportunity, a try, how do you know that Asian American individual cannot succeed as a leader, as a manager? So, and there's a lot of bamboo ceiling going on in our culture, in our corporations. So.
Oh yeah, I actually want to end on a positive note too. Regarding about Asian Americans largely being seen passive. So I had a great conversation with somebody I've been working with last night. So for those who don't know, I have a job and a half. My main job is the Hollywood Housing Society. My part-time job, which feels like a full-time job now with COVID, is at a local nonprofit. It's Project Vietnam Foundation. What we've been doing at the nonprofit is actually offering free COVID-19 testing to the local Vietnamese community, because historically they have had major access to engaging with healthcare, because of poverty, lack of health insurance, and language barriers, cultural, etc. I was talking to a woman that I've been working with, and one of the things we've also been doing is testing nail salon workers. So this came about after Governor Gavin Newsom made a comment about, COVID-19 in California originated from nail salon. And he wouldn't give any details about how he got those numbers or so on. And he wouldn't even follow up, of like, by the way, to support, like, because, when you look at how many nail salons are owned by Asian and specifically Vietnamese, 80% in Southern California. Like, just statistically, like, if you run into I mean, again, this can go into like the whole stereotypes of like, oh, Vietnamese are nail salon artists, which I've had people be like, why are you at university? You should be doing my nails. I'm like, oh, you're a bitch. But like, statistically, like a lot of nail salons are owned by Vietnamese. So when Governor Newsom did that, I have largely respected, his calls, and I was very upset. I said, what the hell, man? You can't just say something and then just leave it.
Yeah.
You realize that this is going to affect so many Asian owned businesses. It's just going to keep stoking that anti-Asian sentiment.
Yeah.
So what we did, and I remember the founder of the nonprofit, she said, no, this is unacceptable. We're going to push back with data. So we've been testing nail salon workers to prove to like, hey, nail salon workers largely, they're all safe. They're, pretty much only 2 out of like 200 people tested positive, which is really nothing. So, and we had, just follow up, but we really wanted to be like, when you make these comments, you're stigmatizing nail salon workers, especially largely Vietnamese nail salon workers. So we did this because we wanted to provide numbers like, look, nail salon workers are safe. It's not nail salon people. So, but the woman I was talking to last night, I told her, I'm like, she asked me, like, do you think he did this on purpose? Do you think, it's internalized racism, implicit bias, and I just told him, like, look, he's a politician. At the end of the day, he's a politician. And we, had a really long discussion, but, she ended it with, I told her, like, I was quite jaded with politics,
Mm-hmm.
in public health, technically I'm supposed to be in government. I'm like, I don't want to work in government because I don't like, for me, I just don't do well in that kind of structure.
Yeah.
But she responded, and I really appreciate what she said. She said, look, I appreciate that you're jaded, Quinn. And she said, I think if anything, this pandemic has really forced us to stop being so passive in our politics and to really step up and go like, no, we are active participants. We are here. We are doing something. We are giving back to community. We deserve, you cannot push us down. And I really, really liked what she said. Like, this pandemic has really been a major wake-up call for Asian America at large.
Yes.
We cannot be passive. We can't just be like, oh, yeah. I think it's a Japanese saying, like, shogunai. We can't. In fact, we have to stand up and go like, no, we're not accepting these terms and conditions. And I remember when I read their text, I went, oh, that's so good. It's like, it's so true. So I really want to end on a positive note about, there's a pandemic going on. It's not great. And I'd like to be like, it's such a phenomenal stress test about like our largely passive apolitical stances are not sustainable. It's not working. It cannot exist. We have to change. And I do believe that will change. That would also affect how we see ourselves represented, how we see ourselves in the large, the big screen, the small screen, the workforce, and politics at large. So I want to end.
I agree.
Like that.
I agree. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think this is a really good ending point, because next week, we will have a guest on our podcast-ish show. And in fact, her name is Serena. She founded this nonprofit called Breaking Taboo. Specifically, they started this new campaign called Stop COVID, Stop Racism. And I think, like you just ended on that really good note, because next week we'll continue this conversation a little bit and just kind of expand more into this whole anti-Asian, this whole racism from this virus. And next week will be probably the last week of May, and we will hopefully, to highlight, the unfortunate, the ignorance behind all this racism, and what we can do about it. How can we support each other. And one of the ways, like you just mentioned, use data. Data sometimes is a very powerful tool, and we will also explore other ways that we can fight racism. So cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any last thoughts or comments before we end this Q?
No, I just really enjoyed this conversation. I'm still trying to think about some random stuff that's like very deep. Oh, stationery. I'm just gonna put it out there. Asians love stationery, cute stationery too, like pens. Like we're really particular about our pens.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I was just like, that's the thing. That's the thing. And I was like, I've always been like really particular about my stationery, like this pen, like the point. And I know it's like it's not a particularly Asian thing, but I just noticed like my Asian friends were much more obsessed about it than like my non-Asian friends. So.
Oh yes, so yes, we're obsessed with these like cutesy little pants, different color pants.
Oh yeah.
Have you noticed that a lot of Asian Americans in their vehicle cars, they love to hang something from their mirror. Have you
Yeah, no,
noticed?
I hang it. Me too.
Yeah.
I hang a little Buddhist tag that my mom gave me for protection, and then
Yeah.
Buddhist charm that I got from at the fair one time. So
Yes. So growing up in LA, I noticed almost everyone have that like hanging from their mirror in their car. I just thought I don't have it. I don't use it, but I just think that that's very, in a way, kind of very Asian too. So
yeah, but yeah, that's all I got. But yeah, I just really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's really important. I'm excited for next week's podcast.
cool. Yep.
So
All right then. All right. Thank you so much for watching this, and hopefully we will see you all next week. All right. Bye.
bye.